Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Grace Boatwright with KnowWho. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar event, Social Media Communications in the Midst of COVID, brought to you by KnowWho, Quorum, and the Airline Pilots Association. Joining us is Vanessa Kermick, ALPA's Director of Grassroots, and Adam Gottbaum, Quorum's Grassroots Customer Success Manager. KnowWho is honored to be co-hosting with ALPA and Quorum today, two groups we've enjoyed doing business with over the years, and two groups who have undoubtedly been with us at the forefront of helping advocates manage their own unique challenges in the middle of this ongoing crisis. The KnowWho team has remained very busy in the last few weeks as more and more folks need reliable contact info for their elected officials, particularly at the state and local levels where so much of this response is being managed now. We've also helped quite a few groups match their members and contacts to their legislative districts as they're needing to know exactly where those valuable resources are located right now. I know that ALPA and Quorum have also been very busy helping their own members and clients get their messages to Congress, particularly regarding the newly ratified CARES Act. I'm anxious to get both Vanessa and Adam's take on recent events, particularly how they've employed social media data as a tool for advocacy and outreach. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom control panel. Please submit your questions there rather than using the chat function. Thank you all again for joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to Adam to kick off our discussion. Adam, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grace. Really excited to be here on behalf of Quorum. Again, I'm Adam Gottbaum. I'm a Grassroots Customer Success Manager at Quorum, and I have the distinct pleasure of working with Vanessa Kermick and the entire ALPA team. I'm very excited to be joining this webinar today to talk a little bit about why should we care about or use social media as part of the advocacy strategy that your organization or any organization is using. So before we get to the important part of this presentation, which will be Vanessa talking about the work that ALPA has done in response to this COVID crisis, I just want to talk a little bit from kind of the Quorum perspective about why should we care about social media? Why is this important? For many people who know this industry, who've known this industry for a long time, advocacy and lobbying is all about making connections with lawmakers and connecting people. So why use social media? And as it turns out, and as some of the data I'm about to show you, this is where the legislators and their staffers are and where they're communicating. So just to start off, when it comes to advocacy, social media is no longer an option. It is absolutely essential to both understand the conversation that's going on Capitol Hill and in state legislatures as well, but also in participating in it. As you can see, Facebook and Twitter are nearly universally used across the House and Senate. Instagram is right up there as well, with 80% of the House and 73% of the Senate having active accounts. So with these sort of new mechanisms of communication come staff functions on the Hill as well. And we are really thankful at Quorum to be able to partner with KnowWho to help us get this information about staffers and legislators. And one of the things that they help us find out from the data is that there are over 170 staffers across 90 different offices with either digital or new media or social media in their job title. So this is really ubiquitous and really important to keep an eye on. So in terms of, it's not just about the fact that they're on the platforms and viewing content there, they're also posting an enormous amount. So legislators are posting, and I guess I should mention before I say all this, these are stats from 2019. This is data that we collected in Quorum for the previous year. But legislators are posting up to 1,200 times a day on Twitter and over 700 times a day on Facebook. And this doesn't even consider the volume of tweets coming out of the White House. We'll leave that to the side for today. But with this much dialogue coming from official accounts, and this doesn't include their campaign accounts, this is just the official accounts, I should add, it's really impossible to ignore these channels and really important to be considering how do we get involved in this conversation? What does that look like? So kind of one of the last things I'll mention about social media in terms of the data has to do with age. I feel like, a lot of people will think, oh, maybe it's just the younger legislators who are both instructing their staffs to be on social media, but also they themselves on social media. And this just turns out not to really be the case. This isn't just for the younger members who might have come in 2018. It's really consistent across age groups. In fact, one of our favorite things is that one of the most active legislators on Instagram is 86-year-old Senator Chuck Grassley. So as you can see from this data here, legislators in their 40s are certainly the most active on social media, but it's a pretty even distribution besides that in terms of who is engaging on social media. So, this last little bit of social data we want to talk about, I'm going to take it back over to Grace to talk a little bit about some of the staffer data that NoHo collects.
Sure, thanks, Adam. This is just a graph depicting the fact that on average, NoHo has found that the rate of turnover on Capitol Hill, at least in regards to staff, is about 15% every 90 days, which just drives home the fact that while the staffers and their titles and their emails might change, the social media handles for most of these legislative offices do not change, which makes it all the more important to be reaching legislators on that platform. And this is just a quick graph to show you the rate of turnover that occurred last cycle in the House and Senate. Roughly 11% of the Senate changed over and roughly 21% of the House. That, like I said, that's just from last cycle. That's not on average. But it also just sort of drives home the fact that social media is a great way to get a hold of these legislators.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Grace. So, that's just some data to talk, to set the scene about the importance of social media and how this really is driving a lot of conversation on the Hill and is a really important place to be reaching out. And so, of course, for today, we want to talk about how can you get your advocates, your members, your constituents to be engaging on social media and what kind of effect can that have? Before I jump into that, we just got a question in the chat talking about will we be distributing the slide deck and also a recording of this webinar, and we certainly will. There will be a survey that at the end, and one of the things is if you're interested in getting a recording of this, we ask that you fill out that survey. It'll be right at the end. It'll kind of pop up for you to take. So now let's get to the important part. Let's talk a little bit about what the Airline Pilots Association and Vanessa Kermick have been able to do in response to the COVID crisis. I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa.
Hey, thanks, Adam, and thanks for everyone for being with us today. I know that many industries are in turmoil right now and gearing up for the next stimulus package. So wanted to share with everyone what we did for the third stimulus package, and hopefully sharing our story resonates and will be helpful for you. First and foremost, I don't believe in doing something for the members just to make them feel better. But I do believe it is critically important to give them a voice during this time in the legislative process as things are especially intense right now. So this slide you're looking at the moment shows how much travel has fallen off year over year from 2019 to 2020. So, just looking at this quick snapshot, we needed to engage in a real way in the Stimulus 3 plan, just because travel is an essential vehicle, and we wanted to make sure our pilots were taken care of. If we can go to the next slide. So at ALPA, we have an approach to legislation in a tiered fashion. Our PAC works directly with members of Congress, chiefs of staff. Our ledge team directly engages with legislative directors, the ledge team on the Hill. Social media works directly with the comms team, and our letter writing campaign goes directly to legislative correspondents who then report up to the members of Congress. So in this current situation, we now have a huge emphasis that's placed on social and also letter writing. And we wanted to make sure our members were having their voices heard. So we made some immediate actions in addition to our virtual lobbying. So our communications team, which we are lucky that we have, our government affairs office has a really good working relationship with, created a landing page with info on COVID where our members and also friends and family and the public could get information about what was happening in the situation. And then we initiated a letter writing campaign to the Hill. So it was completely editable so people could personalize it, which I think is extremely important, and add and share their stories. As the situation started to change and transition over the weekend, we moved to a completely social engagement with members of Congress that our members and friends and family could then tweet at their members of Congress, which made it really personal because we knew staff wouldn't be checking email over the weekend. So that's why we transitioned and we were really agile in that situation. And then as the Senate then passed legislation, we transitioned back to letters just to the House and tweets to the House. So our advocates were able to engage, and we will share some of the data with you on statistics later in the presentation, but we could go to the next slide. So this is some examples just of the end of the workflow of the call to action that we had, which was great because the letter writing campaign had a social sharing function once the advocate took action, and this is the example. They could share the campaign and continue to amplify it. And we can go to the next slide. So additionally, the campaign allowed pilots to take action on other campaigns. So that's a part of the quorum workflow that we have when we set up the calls to action. So once the pilot was engaged with the call to action, they could continue to take more actions. So we can go on to the next slide. And one awesome part about the Twitter campaign and the social sharing is that other pilots would see the tweets and then engage with those tweets on their feeds and then get involved with the campaign. Overall, we had about 200,000 impressions and about a 4% engagement rate on social media. That didn't include the letter writing campaign, but so for us, general engagement is less than 1% on social, so that was a huge uptick. So having the pilots really get engaged, take action, and tweet at their members of Congress, and we can go to the next slide. You can see here's some of the examples here of what the pilots taking action looked like. So when we transitioned to the Twitter campaign, tagging the members of Congress, it made it more personal, visible, and targeted. So here we included a hashtag so we could track the tweets and see what was trending. This is great for short-term engagement when you really want to deliver a targeted message quickly, which suited that campaign for over the weekend. And we can go. And then we also got some great engagement from members of Congress. As you can see, Representative Swalwell was retweeting our message on his social media site, and that is awesome engagement, and which is exactly what we wanted. So this was before the House voted on the package. So we can go to the next slide. All right, this is one of my favorite slides in this deck. And if you take anything away from this today, and this was a cautionary tale, is to check your tweet before you send it out in any campaign. We have a lot of folks that want to get input on our tweets, and sometimes the tweets need a little haircut. So beyond just making sure that you say that you're a constituent, adding the issue and a wonderful hashtag, make sure you check those tweets before you go ahead and post on a campaign that they're only 240 characters. So Quorum does an amazing job with matching the legislator in the call to action with the constituents so that they do that for us in the actual call to action. But being able to tag the legislator and have it go to the Hill was a great campaign for us. But checking to see that there's 240 characters, I think a number of times it's been over for us. So that would be a cautionary tale. We can go to the next. So we rounded out the campaign and following up on our barrage of digital inputs to the Hill with a thank you to the members of Congress. They rarely get thank yous. So we wanted to make sure that they knew that what they were doing really supported our pilots. And it was a great opportunity for our members to re-engage with the members of Congress and just to round out the campaign. We can go to the next. So here was the overall result of what happened. So we had a lot of engagement And while we're still seeing the results of the legislation unfold, we know that our pilots and our industry received real aid towards this, and our members had a real voice in the process. So we see that as a huge result and a win for us. So with that, I will turn it back over to Adam.
Amazing. Vanessa, thanks so much. As you can see, just before I move off this slide, like some of the numbers that Alpha was able to generate with this campaign are really staggering and just an incredible testament to the work that they did and the impact that they had, clearly. So now that we've talked about the real world example, I just want to add on towards the end here just a few thoughts on some of my recommendations. I'm an account manager. I work with a lot of clients at Quorum who use the grassroots platform, and I talk to a lot of them about social media campaigns. And so just want to mention a few key considerations when thinking about social media for advocacy work in today's day and age. So sometimes a question I get a lot is when should we use social media, or when should we not be using social media, with our advocacy campaigns, with our digital efforts? And as a rule of thumb, my general recommendation is pretty much always, whenever possible. You should really just always be thinking about the social component as sort of a follow-up or as a secondary ask. So while the social aspect of it might not be the main thing, oftentimes the main aspect of the campaign that people are running is sending a letter to their member of Congress or asking them to make phone calls, something like that, a really direct engagement with the legislator that the offices like to see. But having social media as the follow-up can be really, really powerful. And there are a couple ways to do it. Here are three kind of general recommendations. Sometimes you'll want to add a legislative or an appropriations ask as the follow-up, social campaign, trying to drive the legislator to take a public position and communicate on this public channel to see if they'll come out and say something in response to your advocates reaching out. Other times it's a thank you. Like Vanessa said, it's a really effective and powerful way to message to the Hill, to express thanks for the work that they're doing and let them know and that their constituents are appreciative of what they're doing and can oftentimes generate goodwill between your organization and the legislator. So having a follow-up thank you for policymaker actions could be a great way to do it. And then finally, sort of as a virtual fly-in, let's say if you're, of course, not really doing that many fly-ins these days, but if you are having some sort of a virtual fly-in or a virtual planned engagement, using social media as a follow-up to say, hey, thanks for getting in touch with me, to kind of show to the public that the legislator is taking meetings is great, because one, it lets the legislator say, hey, here I am, I'm doing my job, I'm meeting with my constituents, and gives your advocates a great way to show that they're civically engaged and working on behalf of your organization. In the case of the pilots, it's really important to them that they do this sort of work, but even for any sort of association or organization. So the other question would be, when would you not want to use social? When would you not want to tack on that secondary ask? And really here you want to think about like barrier to entry. When planning an advocacy, a digital advocacy campaign or an ask, you want to think like, is this a big ask or a small ask in terms of like taking time out of their day, or perhaps something wouldn't normally be interested in or engaged in? When it's something that's vital right now, like responses to the COVID crisis and trying to gain funding with the CARES Act, a lot of advocates are probably itching to get involved and do something. And so it's not that big of a deal to have us follow up, ask, hey, use your social media. Hey, like let's send tweets or make posts. That's really important. But when it's something perhaps a little bit smaller and it's, hey, this is not as sexy of an issue or something that you're like super aware of, maybe that's not asking to write a letter about that. Maybe then you don't want to say, hey, could you also use your social media accounts to push this as well? So think about how much you're asking your advocates and how urgent it is, and use that as consideration of, hey, do we tack on a social media component as well? Next, let's talk about platforms. Which one of these, which platforms across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, should you be asking your advocates to leverage? In general, Twitter is going to be king. Twitter is the place where the conversation is going on. It's where legislators are most active. It's where their staff are reading. It's where the conversation is happening. So in general, we highly recommend thinking about Twitter first as the platform you want to ask people to engage on. The other benefit of Twitter as a platform is that it's one of the only ones that allows pre-populated messages to be transferred from a platform like Quorum, like our platform, to have a pre-populated message that goes straight from the platform to Twitter, so that they click one button and a pre-written message that tags the right legislator and has the right hashtag that you or your grassroots person has already signed up. You can click a button and it'll create that tweet for them. This is not something that Facebook or Instagram allows you to do. So when thinking about what is the kind of going to be the easiest thing for for your advocates to use, it's probably going to be Twitter. Now, Facebook can be really great for when you want to kind of build a community or build a group, and encouraging your advocates to use Facebook in that regard. If you want to build a community of people focused on a certain issue, that can be a good time to think about asking people to engage on Facebook to help build up a network from their own list of friend groups. The other thing to consider is age group, age of the advocates. Facebook is definitely a more popular medium among the older individuals, and so that's one place to think about it. In addition, when talking about lead ads, which is something we haven't touched on yet, if you are planning to run lead ads, which are paid ads that drive individuals on these social platforms to your landing pages to engage in these, to either capture advocates or engage in these campaigns, Facebook oftentimes is going to be the best. That's where you're going to see the best performance. It just, at least in my experience, as someone who's worked in digital now for 4 years, for me is quite a while, Facebook is the most effective platform for that. But these are also things you can run on Twitter. Now, you'll notice I haven't talked about Instagram yet. Instagram tends to not be a great channel for driving action. It's not really where people go to look to get involved, but it can be a great channel for asking your advocates to share their stories or share what they're doing among their personal networks. So finally, one of the last things I want to talk about is making sure that you're coordinating between teams when thinking about doing a social media campaign. Social media, it tends to introduce the element of giving your advocates the option to add their own language or add their own spin on whatever you're building up. So you want to make sure there's great communication between the advocacy team, which is might be you, the person on this webinar, or someone else in your organization, and the communications team, just to make sure that messaging is lining up. I was actually hoping I could ask Vanessa just to comment a little bit about this, because I know that she and her team work very closely with the communications team to make sure that these campaigns go well.
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. We, like I mentioned, are lucky that our comms team and our GA team work hand in hand to ensure that our messaging and content is on brand and on message, to make sure that our advocates are sending out consistent messaging and that we're on point. And to your point of just making sure that people don't change the tweets and things like that, what I found is that they're so excited that you've put together a tweet for them that they just want to send it out, and they just want to make sure that they don't want to mess it up putting it out on their social channels. So that's been my experience with our pilots and friends and family. And so that's, we've had a lot of successful campaigns that way. I also create a lot of advocacy plans for our comms team and our GA team, just to make sure everyone kind of knows what's coming up, has an idea of what I'm thinking about and where we're headed next. So that's also been really helpful, and where I'm thinking about the deliverables need to be and what we need in terms of staff participation. So those are just some of the things that I think of when I'm working with my comms team.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah. So at least on my end with like my clients, we kind of put together 3 recommendations when thinking about, like, if I want to do a social related campaign, what are the steps I want to take to make sure there's coordination between teams. Number 1, make sure your messaging is on brand. When thinking about what you want to ask your advocates, who are the real world representatives of what you're trying to push, or oftentimes the constituents of the legislators you're trying to influence, you want to make sure that the messaging you're asking them to share kind of aligns with what we imagine is the positivity and the thank you kind of style messaging that your organization is using, rather than to sort of hopefully avoid any sort of shaming posts, which might not reflect well on your organization. Another one is have a clear review process. Make sure that you have a pre-existing understanding of who are the people you're going to need to get approval for any language that you're writing up or you're asking your advocates to send out. Oftentimes, what interesting situations I'll get into is where the people I work with directly will want to stand up a campaign in an instant. They need to get something out. There's a bill coming to the floor and they want to get their advocates tweeting about something. And what the barrier they run into is, oh wait, it turns out I need to get the head of communications to approve this, or maybe the president of the organization to approve this. So make sure to have an understanding of who's going to need to read and review the copy or on the planning the campaign beforehand. Also good to make sure that this does exist so that someone is just making sure to check the copy, make sure there aren't any issues. Of course, that's all very standard issue. And finally, make sure to share language between campaign posts and that of your organization's official account. Aligning messaging can be really great to create that resonance on social media platforms between what your organization is pushing out on their official accounts and on like your website or any sort of work that maybe your lobbyist is doing in the Hill, and aligning it with what the advocates are saying on social media that you're asking them to do. Make sure that those line up so that the hashtags are the same and that the general messaging is the same, so that when you're kind of building that awareness of what the message is, it's all going to be saying the same thing. All right, and finally, just want to make sure that everyone is thinking about metrics for success. With any sort of campaign or plan, you want to think about what are going to be the KPIs to indicate if this social media campaign has gone well. Vanessa, earlier we were talking about Alpa's, a lot of their KPIs, which included how many letters were sent, how many tweets were sent, what their engagement rate was. All of these can be a really great way of saying this campaign is going well or this campaign is not going well. Because understanding that can be great, especially for reporting up to the executives or the people who run your organization. They're going to want to see, hey, how did this go? Like, they might not have as much of an understanding about what an effective social media campaign looks like. So here are like kind of a few potential KPIs. Response rate from policymakers. How many replies to your advocate post are you seeing from legislators themselves? This can be a great place where a tool like Quorum or another sort of social media monitoring tool can come in handy, where you can see anytime these legislators are tweeting or responding, so you can capture that information. Volumes of posts for your hashtag, measuring how many posts are going out with that specific hashtag that you're trying to push out. Acquisition of new advocates. Are you running lead ads to drive people to this campaign? How many new people are coming in the door based off of it? It's a great way to think about the messaging of the campaign and perhaps having a different series of copy on these ads to see which one is most effective. What framing is going to be the most effective in getting someone who previously wasn't involved in your organization to click on that ad, to add their email address, and to kind of join your list. Click-through rates on campaigns. This is great kind of digital, a hard metric of how much digital engagement are we getting. And then legislative reach and legislative success. These ones are a little bit harder to nail down, but these are more bread and butter for the advocacy industry, of just understanding did we get these bills through in the era of COVID, and with the current bills, like including the CARES Act. It's a little bit quicker to understand the impact you're having in terms of how much relief is coming out. ALPA was really excited to see the $61 billion in funding going to the airline industry. But these are just some of the metrics that you can try and line up to see, hey, was this social media campaign a success? What kind of boost did we get in our engagement because we added social media as a component? And I believe that brings us to the end here. Before I pass over to Grace, who's going to handle Q&A, just wanted to mention again, if you're interested in getting a recording of this presentation and the deck, there will be a survey right at the end that you can take, and we'll make sure to get you that information. So hand it over to you, Grace.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Vanessa. That was fantastic. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers did as well. We do have a few questions here. What about LinkedIn as a platform? Do policymakers or their staffers go on LinkedIn? And if so, for what? I think it's probably for you, Adam.
Oh, well, I think I'm going to just be totally honest here. I don't have a ton of information or data about where legislators or staffers are looking at LinkedIn. One thing that one kind of piece of information I have with LinkedIn has to do with like those lead ads and acquisition and trying to drive new people to come towards your campaigns. LinkedIn does offer the ability to run lead ads and oftentimes asks on that nature where, LinkedIn is a platform that's all about putting, I guess with all social media platforms, particularly LinkedIn and Facebook, they want to make sure that when there's content being put in front of you, you see that sort of social currency of like, oh, this person with whom you're connected also engaged with this or is interested in this. But in terms of if legislators and staffers are engaging on LinkedIn, this is not something any of my clients have talked to me about in terms of like, that's their focus. I don't know, Vanessa, do you have any?
Yeah, so Facebook and LinkedIn are really within the Beltway, and Twitter within the Beltway are huge. You go outside the Beltway, it's different metrics, but within the Beltway, you just get this uptick in engagement, and especially with LinkedIn on thought leadership. If that's something that drives your organization, if it's great to be participating on LinkedIn in that way and in driving members or clients there. For us, Facebook and Twitter, we have a lot of pilots on forums. So their Facebook and Twitter for us is big, and Instagram not so much. But yeah, I think, depending, it really depends on where like we talked about, where your advocates, where your people are at, and what resonates with that. But in terms of where Hill staff are, DC for sure, like that. You just have to figure out what works for your people, and then get that data up there.
Very cool. Do you think that, I know we kind of already basically went over this, but if your organization is utilizing all the different social media channels, obviously Twitter has some restrictions around how many characters you're allowed to use, etc. Vanessa at Alpha, do you manipulate the message for each different social media platform, or do you kind of try to use the same verbiage everywhere?
So we try and make it consistent. Like when we were talking about at the end of the campaigns with the social sharing feature, we have very consistent messaging. So when folks are taking action, following, either sending a letter, yes. And the tweets are all pre-populated, so that ensures consistent tweeting throughout. And we saw that slide that all the tweets were the same except for the member of Congress. So that way, we're getting our branding and our hashtagging all across the board, like getting our message out. So
excellent.
Another thing I'll add on that is Twitter is the only platform that allows you to, tools like ours, or at least that we've talked about today, that allows tools like ours to pull in messaging for the body of the tweet. Facebook kind of blocks that. Instagram also blocks that. But one thing you can control on those other platforms is the metadata of the post, i.e. if there's a link included in the post or like an image that you're sharing, you can make sure that the images are going to be the same from Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also, if you include a link, what kind of generates in that preview of the link, that sort of messaging can be lined up.
Excellent. Do either of you have any advice for folks on this next round of stimulus legislation? I'm sure Alpha has been gearing up, and Quorum, you've probably been hearing from some of your clients. How do you think that the messaging will change for this next round?
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be a lot of people trying to make a lot of noise. And one thing we're working on right now is just getting video of our pilots just talking about what's going on with their situation, especially with PPE right now, and what we need. So taking a look at what we're going to need in this next stimulus, and just getting our advocates to put a face to that issue. So making it extremely personal, and then targeting members of Congress that way. I think video is really something that's, I know, I want to be using it more, and we're targeting that.
Excellent.
I think the only thing I would add is just that the numbers in terms of engagement on social media, like kind of across the board, are really high. Not a surprise. Everyone is spending time in front of their screens these days. In person, it's just everyone's in front of their screens. So the one recommendation I have is, here we are at this webinar, but like make sure to include a social component. Take advantage of social media as a way of amplifying any message you have, because in general, you're going to get more eyes on the content that gets out there, and just have a better chance of sort of creating momentum there. The other piece of advice I have for people going into this next round of conversation about what Congress is going to do is just, if you are an organization that has a platform like Quorum or another sort of grassroots platform has a body of people who might want to get involved and has considered using grassroots as a way of trying to move the needle, now is the time to try it. Engagement numbers are incredibly high. As Vanessa knows, the engagement of her pilots on this campaign has been astronomical. And I'm seeing this across almost all of my clients, is when they take the plunge and stand up a campaign and ask their members, their advocates, what have you, to do something, people are doing it. People are interested in getting involved, interested in what's going on the Hill. And so now is the chance to stand up a campaign, see what kind of participation you get, see what kind of reaction you get from your members, and also to see where that goes for your lobbying efforts. See what it does if you're able to come into a meeting, get on a call with a staffer or with a legislator and say, hey, like 10,000 of our people in your state have gotten involved and reached out about this. So this is the time to try to use grassroots to have an impact on the work you're doing.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for being with us today. Everybody, thank you for joining us. If you'd like more information on Quorum, NOHU, or ALPA, you have our websites right there in front of you. Feel free to email us with any questions or concerns you might have. And we're just getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. I think everybody enjoyed the discussion, and I know I learned a lot. Please feel free to take the poll before you officially leave the meeting. And with that, thank you, everybody, and have a good weekend.
Thanks all.